So welcome everyone to day 4 of Mental Health Awareness Week, and the theme is loneliness. Really warm welcome to you if you're joining us for the first time, and thank you so much as well for those of you who've been joining us over the last few days. Really appreciate your support. So this is our final day of sharing, and it's a really, really important topic that we're going to be covering. It's on suicide prevention, which, as we know, we talk about mental health, we talk about the theme of loneliness, and linked with loneliness, sometimes we talk about depression, and suicide prevention is another important aspect, because sometimes our thoughts can take us down negative spirals, and if we're able to look out for those signs both for ourselves and for others, then we can actually make a difference and help save a life. So that's what we are working with. I'm Priya Shah, happiness speaker, trainer, and coach, and through Happy Life Habits, positively impacting people's happiness and well-being levels. And what I like to do is ask this question as we start off. And so, those who are familiar, please put it in the chat if you're happy to share. And the question is, using the scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is not very happy and 10 is very happy, but not using the number 7, but you're allowed to use fractions and decimals. Just take a check of where you are at this moment in time, how happy you feel, and please, if you're happy to share that, please do so. And the key thing here again is everyone's scale is unique to them, so there's no need to compare your number with anyone else's. Someone's 8 could be someone else's 6, but it's more there as a checkpoint for you to just be aware of where you are. So if you are happy to share that, please do so. And if you don't want to share, that's fine as well, but just make a note for yourself. Great. And as we have shared on other days, it's there to raise our awareness, for us to be aware of where we're at, checking in, and then if we want to, we can change that number by taking action and doing some of the practices that we share, and doing some of the putting into place some of the ideas and concepts which we've been sharing during this week. So that's what we have there. So as I said, it's Mental Health Awareness Week, and throughout the week we've partnered with different organizations, groups, and individuals to bring you these 4 days of events. So we've partnered with Mind in Enfield and Barnet, and they joined us. Martin joined us on Tuesday. Authentic Responses, so that's Priya, so she'll be sharing today. Oshal Connect, Sonal Dave, who shared yesterday on stress and anxiety in the workplace. Consultancy, where we had Hansa sharing with us on Tuesday as well. Manish Gohel, part of Manish Gohel consultancy, as well as Manish Gohel coaching, and also looking after some Facebook groups such as Asian Parents Group and the Business Club. Young James as well, and we thank our sponsors, Barracks Consultancy, for supporting us on this endeavor. So really take the opportunity to thank all those groups and organizations and the people involved in helping to share about these events, and also those who've taken part in presenting as well. So thank you so much. And so a quick definition, which we've been sharing, and it's one which I think the more often we hear it, the more often it helps us remember what the theme is and what we're about. So the World Health Organization shares that mental health is a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. So community and connection we looked at on Monday, stress we looked at yesterday, and a little bit on Tuesday as well. And being productive and other things are all part of it. So some key words are in there. Another definition is to think, feel, and react in a way that we need and want, which is a quite nice explanation of it. And there can be conditions which affect our mood, thinking, and behavior, which can knock us out from a good mental health to not so good mental health. And we are all on that spectrum at different points. And any condition that disrupts an individual's everyday life is something that can impact mental health, be it stress, be it grief, be it a breakup. Any of these things can impact us. The theme this year is loneliness. So the Mental Health Foundation have chosen this theme, and 3 things that they shared regarding loneliness is the feeling we experience when there is a mismatch between the social connections that we have and those that we need or want. So a mismatch. And it also found that the warmth of our relationships throughout life has the greatest impact on our life satisfaction and health. And those who come across the Blue Zone work will have heard this, as well as the Robert Waldinger talk I shared a couple of days ago will highlight that social connection is the most important thing for our well-being. And during the lockdowns, what they found is that loneliness went up 3-fold compared to pre-pandemic, and that's a huge increase, going up 3 times. So it's one which has impacted all of us or someone we know. And so, as I said, Monday we had community connection, and we had some real courageous, wholehearted sharings from Rashna, Manish, and Arti, all representing in parts of different communities and groups and having their own journeys of when they felt lonely. And then on Tuesday, we had Martin and Hansa talking about mental health, some of the things that cause mental health, things that cause loneliness and how we can overcome those, and Hansa sharing how we can cope with loneliness and talking about building our social connections and mentioning, having connections for emotional support, moral support, and practical support. Then yesterday, Sonal shared about stress and anxiety in the workplace and how to offer support. And she shared a lot, shared quite in depth of some of the challenges she faced in the workplace, and many of these challenges really impacting her health, her mental health, and to a point where, the workplace or the manager, in effect, was bullying, and that how she wasn't getting the support that was needed from the workplace. So she shared her journey, she shared some case studies, and shared things that we can do to help recognize these things and support. And so that brings us to today's session, which is on suicide prevention. And this was one of the first ones I thought of Priya when I realized the theme was loneliness. So back in January, as it became clear what the theme was, this was one of the things that came to mind, and being aware of the work that Priya does, this was what I wanted to reach out and ask her to share with us. So Priya is someone I've known for over 20 years. And in fact, when we talked about community, as we did on Monday, Priya and I were in the same community group with a few others, volunteering our time and working together. And that's how we initially met. So that community and connection started there. And Priya has gone on to work in the charity sector and volunteer sector, and got us. And what she does is she trains people who are helping others. So when we hear about these crisis lines and these helplines, whether it's Childline or Samaritans or lots of these other charities and organizations to provide these support lines for people. The people who pick up those phones are the people who Priya and her team train, so that they can best offer their services and help those who need the help. So doing that work of training the people who are that frontline support. So a couple more things, just as tying in with the theme that so one of the things that we've been highlighting throughout the week is connection is so important. And Brené Brown has shared this quote, which is, one of the ones which I love at whole with, which I really love. And it's connection is why we're here. And it's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. Without connection, it's so difficult to live a happy, healthy life or to be part of a community. So connection is so important, and we're wired for connection. 3 organizations, the Greater Good Science Center, which does a lot of research on the science of happiness, Action for Happiness, another charity, and Misuse for Happiness, another organization sharing about happiness. All 3 of them, and I've shared that connection is important and relationships are important. So on the brain, you can see here, it says connection and community at the top here. On this one, relating is in regards to relationships and connection. And on this one here, it says here, relationships. So for our happiness and for our health and for our well-being, relationships are so important. They help us feel connected, give us a sense of belonging and identity, and significant health benefits such as building our resilience, helping us to live longer, being loving and being loved, and helping us learn, grow, and develop, and giving us a sense of meaning. The picture you see there is of Robin Williams, a great actor, and we'll come to him. Actually, yeah, I'll share the quote that I've shared before regarding Robbins. So one of the things that Robin Williams said, so he brought laughter to many people. And one of the things, and he took his own life a few years ago through feeling depressed and lonely and disconnected. And the thing that the quote he shared is, I used to think the worst thing in the world was being lonely. It's not. The worst thing in the world is being with people who make you feel lonely. So the real big emphasis there that we can all be responsible to help people not feel lonely. So that's the message we've been sharing. And so, as I shared, Priya has been doing this work for a number of years, providing different kinds of training at the International Day of Happiness. She shared on self-care, which went down really well, and reminding people how to look after themselves. And suicide prevention is another one, and there's a few other bits of training that she provides with her team. And I'm going to actually hand over to Priya now to introduce some of the training you do and specifically lead us through this important topic of suicide prevention.
Brilliant, thanks Shay for the introduction, and just to say thank you to everyone who's here. I can't see anyone actually on camera, but that's absolutely okay. As I said earlier, you may have missed me if you hadn't come in. It's always nice to see smiley faces, but I can understand that if you are still having dinner or feeling a bit shy today, it's fine to have your cameras off. So as Shay said, just a little bit of background information before we get going on thinking about suicide prevention. My background is in the charity sector, been doing it for a while, and joining me in this adventure is Rachel, who's also here today as well. So Rachel and I work together. We have our own companies, but we actually work together to develop and deliver courses. So I'm Authentic Responses, Rachel is Kilty, and Kilty's strapline is all about kindness. We've been working together for a while. We seem to have a synergy. We have a similar way of thinking about stuff, and have put together a course, a one-day course called Beyond Blue, which is actually all about responding to callers who may be expressing suicidal thoughts or actually have a plan, or perhaps actually are at risk, immediate risk. And we spend the whole day going through that, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it later on. But we have also, as Shay said, lots of other courses as well. But today, the focus is thinking about suicide prevention. And I've tried to sort of also think about it in terms of, where we place ourselves in terms of this sort of thing around loneliness, you know, how perhaps the sense of isolation, feeling that sense of loneliness may start those thought processes, and perhaps it actually makes us more vulnerable. So let's get going. What do we plan to do in the next, I want to say 45 minutes to 60 minutes? I'm going to go through a couple of things with you. First of all, just a quick sort of, where do we sit? You know, what is our attitudes towards suicide? What are our own thoughts? A little bit of information to back up some of that thinking. And then moving on to who perhaps is at risk, who are the people that are more vulnerable, who are the groups of people who are more vulnerable. And then not too much of the statistics, but it's always important to consider, you know, what is the wider picture? How do we, as a society, you know, think about suicide? And then if you do find yourself at a place where perhaps either you are speaking to someone or supporting someone, what are the things that could be helpful in those conversations? And then finishing off with a little bit around places to seek other support. And at this point, I always say, this is one of those conversations where, and even this presentation, where perhaps you find yourself thinking, actually, you know what, this is too close to home, it's pressing a button, then look after yourself. If you need to take time out, take time out. If you have a question, please unmute yourself or send it in the chat. I've got superb admin support by Herschel and Shay who are going to tackle and hang on to those things. If I can answer anything then and there, I'm more than happy to do so. And if I think, oh, actually, this is something we're going to cover at a later stage, then I may park it and put it at the end, because again, there's space there at the end to have that time to discuss any of the stuff that we've mentioned. So do look after yourself. You know, it's one of those topics or conversations which actually for many people it can be really difficult to even think about, you know, and if you've had any personal experiences, again, it can place you to be quite vulnerable. So let's start off with thinking about, you know, what is our attitudes to suicide? I'm actually going to just pause this for a moment and actually share with you a poll. So the poll is anonymous. I'm going to launch it in a minute. I think it's just launched now. And there's 5 statements. And what I would like you to do is either disagree or agree with the statement. I won't be able to see who responded, but what I will do is share back the responses. So, you know, we may find we have unanimous agreement, or we have unanimous disagreement, or actually we have a split. And we'll just go through and see where we sit. So if I'm correct, you should all be able to see it now. And there's a grey bar at the side. Bear with me again. Let's try again. Can we see it now?
I can't see it yet.
No, not yet.
Everybody else? Relaunch poll.
Yeah.
Yes. There we go. So grey bar at the side, right down to the bottom, and then you can submit. There's 5 statements. And I'll give you a few minutes just to do that. So the results are whizzing in. 8 out of 10. Is there a TV show called 8 out of 10, I think? Once we get 10 out of 10, I'll share it or I'll end it. I'm not sure, do I count as the 10th? Maybe I count as the 10th, yeah? Okay, so I'm going to end the poll, unless there's one more person still to fill in their questions, their answers. Okay, I think that's everyone. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share it and I'm going to run through it just as together so that you get to see exactly the same information that I'm seeing. So now you can actually see the statements and also where we placed ourselves. So first one we have is we can talk about suicide in any way we want. So interestingly, we've got a 50-50 split. So 8 people answered, 4 people said agree, 4 people said disagree. Normally, I'd say, what are your thoughts around this? But given that we're running as a webinar, I'm going to give you my take on where we sit with this. So when we talk about suicide, it's really interesting, actually, that we have a 50-50 split, because really, there is something around the language that we use, and there's something about the history behind suicide as well. So ideally, what we want to do is use non-stigmatizing language when we talk about suicide. And so even now, yeah, actually, funny enough, even today, this morning, when I was speaking to someone, somebody said to me, oh, did they commit suicide? And I said, and there was this conversation of actually really commit suicide or failed suicide attempt or successful suicide, all do carry negative connotations. And the history behind this is because suicide was and classed as a criminal act. So until the Suicide Act in 1961, it was illegal. So that's where the expression committed suicide comes. Now, suicide is no longer a criminal offence. But actually what we want to do is encourage the terminology, if you are going to talk about it, is attempted suicide, died by suicide, or even to use the verb suicide. Sometimes people don't even state the word suicide. I think if you look at it from sort of a cultural perspective, sometimes people will actually just brush past it and won't even mention it, thinking that it's something around the shame. The idea that this word carries a lot of shame as well. So we should talk about suicide, but we should also be mindful about the language we use around this, and to actually switch our thinking from commit to actually died by suicide is probably the most appropriate way. And then there's also suicidal ideation, which I'll come to later on, and that pulls together the whole grouping of people or anyone who has thoughts, ideas, views, contemplations around suicide. So suicidal thoughts or ideas can be called suicidal ideation as well. People who think about suicide are not very strong and only thinking about themselves. So 2 people agreed and 6 people disagreed. Yeah, so this is an interesting one, because actually the person who is there and who does want to die by suicide, for them, is probably the most logical thing that they're thinking about. It's about, I want to die because I'm a burden, I'm a trouble for all those people around me. And really, it's not about seeking attention. It's about seeking support. It's about people wanting to have that support, but actually feeling isolated, feeling as if that there isn't anybody there that can support them. Number 3, everyone who experiences suicide feelings wants to die. So we had most people say disagree. Yeah, actually, with this, it's about, for some people who express suicidal thoughts, it's not actually about wanting to end their life. It's more about wanting to either end the situation that they're in, or to actually leave the pain that they may be feeling mentally or physically, not feeling they have a choice, not feeling that they have another alternative. Suicidal feelings are impossible to go away. Disagree, yeah. Suicidal feelings, there's a waxing and waning. You can have temporary thoughts that can change over time, or you have constant thoughts that are always there sitting in the background. So one of the things we certainly talk about later on is the idea or the evidence that shows that actually for some people we are always going to be vulnerable, but it may be that some things push that to the forefront and other things bring it into the background. And then finally, number 5, suicide only affects certain people. Well, I think actually suicide can affect anyone. It's just that there are certain groups who are more vulnerable, have increased vulnerability to have suicidal thoughts or at risk of suicide. And we're really going to spend the next half an hour looking at these various things in more detail, but it's always good to get literally a straw poll of where people sit around this. And perhaps if we were to do this at the end, we may have slightly different answers. Okay, so I'm going to close that down. So moving on. Oh, this is actually from an organization in Australia, which is actually called Beyond Blue. And what's really interesting about this is that actually the idea that suicidal behavior indicates deep unhappiness, not necessarily a mental health issue. And, we're talking about this within Mental Health Awareness Week. So for many people living with mental health, suicidal is not the thought, as mental health issues are not suicidal. Those people are not suicidal. And not all people who take their own lives have a mental health issue. So what really Beyond Blue is trying to say is there's a distinction here that actually anyone can be affected. You don't necessarily need to have a mental health diagnosis for you to be placed into that camp, let's say, of potentially you could be at risk of suicide. Various factors can happen, various life experiences can happen that can make you more vulnerable. So let's think about who is at risk of suicide. Normally, I would say, let's have a quick round robin on this, but really in terms of two things. One is the factors that influence, and the other is the group. So going back to our poll, and one of the key factors is isolation. So when we talk about isolation, what we're really talking about is people feeling that there isn't a support system available for them. There was an interesting study that was done by done by Dr. Chatterjee, but actually he posted this yesterday on Instagram, and he basically said that, we talk about connection, and actually Shay mentioned it in his introduction, this sense of connections with the people we know, this sense of warmth and richness that we have in the relationships we have. And actually there was a study done last year. So obviously this isn't, very recent. And what it found was that actually positive interactions with strangers help us serve basic needs such as feeling connected and appreciated. So normally we think about the families and the people that we're in connection with. Actually, what this study is saying is the people you meet on the tube or the person that you're standing in the queue with in the supermarket, having that brief smile, that brief eye contact helps us feel connected. And actually, that helps us to feel included and makes us feel belonged in society, that we have a place in this bigger thing. And they call this vitamin S, this idea that actually we all need vitamin S along with our, D's and C's and so forth. So this idea that loneliness, actually, for some people, it's about not feeling connected, not feeling that you're part of something else. And this week, Mental Health Foundation also published a report which was very interesting, which is sort of saying, well, anyone can experience loneliness. Certain risk factors increase our chances of severe and lasting loneliness that can affect our mental health. And so remember this. So isolation puts that person at risk of suicide. And in about 5 minutes, we're going to look at it in comparison to the report findings from the Mental Health Foundation, which, let's say, in this instance, loneliness is one of those factors as well. But let's see if there's any other things that kick in at the same time. What other factors make a person more at risk of suicide? Self-harm behaviors. So we could spend another 45 minutes talking about self-harm behaviors, but in short, these are individuals who use self-harming behaviors it's their response to situations that they're in or feelings that they have, and it's that feeling of control. If you were a mental health practitioner, we would be talking about safe practice around self-harm, and recognizing that for some, it is a way of responding to what's happening to them. It's when it becomes extreme or frequent or dangerous, that's when we need to be mindful. Mental ill health, chronic pain. So just this morning, I think I heard on the radio, BBC just this week, were talking about chronic pain, the idea that living consistently in pain and not knowing that there's a way out actually makes that person more at risk, that there is no end game, there is no relief. And I can't remember the exact stat, but let's say that a lot of people are living with chronic pain. Financial hardship. Cost of living, the fact that actually, a lot of people will be hitting the poverty line or living under the poverty line, that this places extra strain on somebody's mental well-being. that you've got parents who are wondering about how to feed their children, or parents wondering how they're going to heat their homes, in the next few months when we get into the winter months. Substance misuse. Family history actually makes you also more vulnerable to suicide. Domestic violence and trauma, hand in hand. Again, that vulnerability factor, the fact that you've gone through hardship and loss. So if you've lost a parent, but if you've lost a partner, or if you've lost a child, or if you just lost a very close friend or a friend, actually that makes you more at risk, because perhaps there's something about questioning where you sit, and what's happening for you. But the single most relevant factor in all of this is if you've had a previous attempt. So if you find yourself talking to someone and it transpires that actually for this person, this is not the first time that they've had suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation, or have proceeded forward and made a plan, immediately that person is more vulnerable because they've been there before. And now when we look at people, the groups of people that are vulnerable is interesting as well, because actually some of these things cross over, and they also cross over in terms of perhaps thinking about access to means as well. So armed forces, veterans who have left the army, who may perhaps be unemployed, who may be struggling finding accommodation, who may have relationship breakdowns, but also those in the army who may be experiencing violence, experiencing trauma, prisoners, looked after children, middle-aged men. Now that's probably the one fact, if you've read anything around suicide or seen any of the adverts that the Samaritans has done, middle-aged men actually are really vulnerable. And actually one of the studies that Samaritans did was an in-depth study with not so well-off middle-aged men. And the key finding on it was actually the sense of connection, the idea that they don't feel there's a place for them. And what they really need is to feel connected, to feel valued, to be felt as if part of the society, and to have that support structure, to have individuals who will miss them if they don't turn up to the event, who will miss them if they don't attend the football match. So a key risk group: unemployed, homeless, and then there's a few more. Migrants, because again, migrants may also have gone through adversity and trauma. Frontline staff, so paramedics, nurses, doctors, and certainly one of the things obviously from the last 2 years, 24 months, is that we've gone through something where we've had a lot of frontline staff actually going to that point of burnout and then actually questioning, their place in the role that they do. Young people. Now, for me, young people is actually one of the scariest things, because what are we looking at here is a combination of different things. You've got young people who are at home living in a family, or living, perhaps if you're looked after children in care. You've got young people on social media who then have to work and present themselves in a particular way, which places pressure on them to behave in a particular way. And you've got young people in universities or living away who are isolated because their normal structure of support isn't there, and the people that they're associating with, they don't feel connected to. They feel, isolated. Vets and farmers. It's also to do with means. You have farmers who have access to guns. You have vets who work rurally, maybe working alone. Also huge pressure as well. It's a very high pressurized job. And finally, we have those from the LGBTQ community who are basically perhaps even just thinking, well, where do I fit in? And perhaps also thinking about, is this something that I'm going to get support by, or feeling unsupported? So although we have this group of people who are more vulnerable and we've got those risk factors as well, actually, we can all be vulnerable to the risk of suicide. If I was to do a case study, I'd say to you, well, look, you just need a couple of things that perhaps may have gone wrong or are challenging, and there isn't that resilience to go through those speed bumps, then you feel more vulnerable. So it's also about choice. If you choose to live alone and you have a fulfilling work life, you have an active social life, you have friends and family that you visit, actually you're probably feeling quite well in yourself. And if we did Shay's happiness counter, that probably would be ranking quite high, but it's by choice. But if you have this another person who by choice hadn't had a choice because they've basically lost their job, there's perhaps their relationship breakdown, they've had to live by themselves, they can't afford to buy a place, they've got to go in rental accommodation. Those choices that they have no control over makes them feel more vulnerable. And then linking back to the Mental Health Foundation's survey in terms of loneliness, when we look at that, these are the things that were actually mentioned as factors that perhaps will make somebody more at risk. And within this also, you have those groups of people as well. So young people, those from the LGBTQ community, unemployed, homelessness, but also carers, living alone, widowers, people who've been widowed, single people, and also if you are from an ethnic minority, and again, don't feel, these things also put you at risk as well. So I think it's quite interesting the overlaps that we have between this idea that experiencing loneliness, that sense of isolation, some groups are even more vulnerable than the ones that we've just mentioned. Okay, so when we talk about statistics, there is a whole host of statistics around suicide. And I'm just going to tease out a couple that perhaps you may already have information on. And these statistics are all based around England, but actually there's statistics for England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And they come from the Samaritans website, because actually Samaritans is the one organisation where they do collate this. And of course, the National Office for Statistics as well. So there is also something about the delay in how reporting is done. So this information, basically for England, says just shy of 5,000 people died by suicide in 2020. Potentially, this information may be tweaked even because results may come in slightly later. So 2021 stats won't be published for a while. What they're saying is actually fewer people died than in 2019, which is interesting because actually 2020 was the year we were all in lockdown. People really did struggle with loneliness, struggle with the isolation, but actually there were fewer suicides. And when I was reading about prisons, there were less suicides in prisons as well, which is again another place where there is a high rate of suicide, high risk rate of suicide as well. Men aged between 45 and 49 continue to have the highest suicide rate, and actually it's something like 3 men for 1 woman. And it's also to do with the means, but also the means that they choose. Men generally choose weapons or methods which are quick and fast. So we're talking about guns, hanging, while women will choose methods which are probably considered to be softer, tablets, alcohol, which means sometimes, either somebody finds them or they end up in emergency, But female suicide rates have increased since 2017. And why do we think that? Perhaps something to do about domestic violence, something around also social media. And as I said, the stats for under 25s has increased as well, which perhaps is to do with social media. There was a case many years back in Japan, which was copycat suicides, and that was completely driven by social media. And the most common method recorded in England and Wales was hanging. But, actually, farmers and vets is a good example. We did some work with the farming community last year, and one of the things that the coordinator was saying is for farmers who are at risk, they'll often call, and what happens is they're at the top of a field with a gun or with a rope, and they're on the phone, and then actually to get to them is nigh on impossible because they're in some rural area, down a lane, through a gate, and that method that they choose is quick. So they have the means, and they also have that isolation and geographical isolation as well. The statistics are the statistics, and people living in deprived areas are 3 times more likely to die by suicide than those in least deprived areas. So when we go back to our other ones, homelessness, financial hardship, they all play a part in this. I want to touch upon the idea of not just language, but also this idea of suicidal ideation. So we often consider that to be thoughts and ideas. And it is a broad term to describe wishes, contemplations, and preoccupation with death and suicide. But what the research certainly from last year is indicating is that, it's evident that suicidal ideation presents in a waxing and waning manner. Well, what they're saying is that the magnitude and characteristics of suicidal ideation fluctuates dramatically. So where one person might feel something in the morning, where they are later on in the evening might be different, or where somebody is on Monday morning could be very different to where they are on Friday afternoon. So intensity, duration, and character changes. And we need to be mindful of that when we start thinking about, well, if I'm going to be having a conversation with someone, or if I'm worried about someone, what am I going to be looking for? But the key takeaway really is, as there is no typical suicide individual, so, when we talk about those groups and factors, you can have any combination happening there. There are no typical suicidal thoughts and ideations. It's not yes and no, it's not a tick box. But what we need to be mindful of is actually thinking about it in a much more rounded, whole, perhaps even a holistic way. The idea that actually we need to look at all aspects and place no judgment, and really consider where that person is at that point and what's the best support we can provide for that person at that point. And what they need then might be different to what they need at a later date. So what are we talking about when we actually think about, the support, and perhaps also the identification? So active listening skills, I think Summer probably touched on that yesterday, the things that are active listening. But thinking about active listening skills when we think about, the things we hear when we believe that someone may be at risk of suicide, really focusing on those very specific words, feelings, or actions that are mentioned. Because remember, and I think I said it right at the beginning, chances are when that person is seeking support, they may have mentioned it, they may have said something at some point, maybe in passing, it's not a definite, but they've given those clues, they've given those invitations. It's just whether somebody picks up on them. The reality is, unless you are a mental health practitioner or a counsellor or working in a service where that is where you will be seeing lots of service users, most people in their day-to-day life, in their day-to-day conversations, some of this stuff is just said fleetingly. And it's just whether or not we choose to stop, pay attention, and unpack it. So normally when we talk about active listening skills, we talk about a host of responses, we talk about a host of ways to engage. So I'll touch upon that shortly. Specifically, a person who feels suicidal will give invitations for you to ask more. And this is just a short list of perhaps some of the things that you might think, okay, this could be said. I'll just give you a moment to just quickly read those. Now, sometimes some of these things could be just said in passing. I've got a teenager who might often say, God, I failed. And what she's really talking about is failed her chemistry test and not I failed in life. But I know that, I know my teenager. Somebody else, though, around those words, there's a whole bunch of other information. They may be saying a whole load of other stuff that you pick up on as well. The situation they're in, the lifestyle that they have, the experiences that are happening for them at that point in time. There are also other clues that can be helpful in working out where somebody is. So I'm going to flip between these two things. So if you are worried about someone, it may be helpful to consider some of these other indicators as well. So you may have somebody who presents with apathy, so not interested, not engaging, perhaps low in mood, but also stepping away from social activities, or even actually things to do, but if they live by themselves, they might not even necessarily step outside the house. Changes in appearance and sleep patterns. Now, I find that one always really interesting, because for a long time, and I think actually even now, I probably have been to about maybe 3 or 4 face-to-face meetings. For the last 2 years, I've been seeing most people, and most people have been seeing me like Yeso. So really, I could be really tiny, really big, or sitting here in my pajamas, you wouldn't know. If we were seeing each other on a day-to-day basis in the office, then maybe those changes in appearances might slowly creep in. Or, as Rachel pointed out to me, sometimes you might not notice those changes because they're subtle. The fact that as the weeks progress, your colleague has stopped shaving or has stopped, wearing a nice suit and has become more and more disheveled, or comes in most mornings really tired, struggling with sleep patterns. We might not necessarily pick up on that. And the reverse is true. If we haven't seen someone for a long time, that difference is more apparent as well, because we think, oh, we remember them like this, and now they look like this. It's worth unpacking, what's going on. If you know somebody really well and you are supporting someone, increasing in that self-harm behaviors can be an indicator that somebody is struggling. This is based on the premise that actually self-harm is a mode to manage and a mode to feel in control, and is actually that response to trauma. But yet, self-harm is a huge topic. So you can have a variety of different behaviors being presented. For example, eating disorders can be considered a form of self-harm, all the way through to cutting and hiding that as well. So using a razor on your thighs so that it cannot be seen, isolating themselves from others. So behaviors in changes in their behavior, but also not engaging. Or what is more common today is also not engaging in person, but engaging online. So you can hide behind that screen. Levels of anxiety or ambivalence, so one or the other, heightened sense of anxiety or extreme calmness and not bothered, because actually I've made a decision and everything's fine. I'm really calm about this. And that calmness is there because they've made that decision to die by suicide. So I had a colleague who shared this story with me, and basically over a couple of years ago, they said there was one guy who went around the UK. He had family members dotted in various towns and villages, and over a course of 2 months, he went and saw everyone. Everyone thought, oh, how lovely. He was single, wasn't married, he was quite elderly. And they thought, oh God, this is really nice. John's coming to see us. He's coming for the night. We're going to have a catch up. And over the course of 2 months, he basically went to see every single member of his family, nieces, nephews, sister, brother. What was he doing? He was saying goodbye to everyone. He was having those final conversations, not that anybody knew that that was what was happening. And for some others, it's about setting up systems. So for example, making a will, getting their financial order, financial papers in order, making sure everything's neat and tidy, even giving away possessions, dropping things off to the charity shop. And actually, if somebody was to ask them, oh God, you seem to be clearing an awful lot. Yeah, I'm just tidying the house up, just getting rid of all my stuff. But actually behind that, there is a process that is going on. Somebody is struggling. Somebody's just thinking, you know what? I want to make it absolutely easy for the people around me. Because that logical thinking that that person has, that they think they're being helpful, is actually illogical, because really, they're really needing support, but they're not seeking it. So this is just indicators, that have been documented. And even when we go back to the list of things that people might say, these are things perhaps that might be mentioned, and perhaps there might not be. My point to you is that if you find yourself speaking to someone and you have an inkling that actually everything isn't 100%, and perhaps they are struggling, then stop, pay attention, have that conversation, and give that person that time. And that's when we get to well, I give that person that time, but what are the sort of things that I need to consider? So when we talk about this, and obviously these are some of the things that we talk about when we talk about active listening, it's actually those techniques. So there is asking those big open questions where we're sort of saying to someone, what's been happening, how you've been getting on, what's changed. allows that person to give you their story, allows them to tell you all the things that are happening. But it's also quite good to just stop and pay attention to that and not necessarily feel you need to interject. Give that person that time and space to share their story, but to then also provide some reflection on that as well. So for example, if you do identify that actually the person that you're speaking to really hasn't seen anyone apart from you for the last 3 months, it might be worth asking, so how has that been for you? How do you feel? And just zone in a bit more on how that person is within themselves. And use those silences also, because actually, you know what happens when you're silent? It's not going to happen today, but normally somebody jumps in. Somebody feels the need to say something. Because what you want to do is create that open space. You want to create that safe, secure space that somebody can share what's happening for them. And this is also true. I mean, if you've got young people living with you, and young people often spend ridiculous amounts of time in their own bedrooms, usually on devices of various things and sorts, then when that young person does come down and you are busy making dinner, or you are busy replying to emails because you're working from home, stop, put the things away and really pay attention to what's happening for that person. I genuinely believe that actually you can't correct what's happening now, but what we can do is build our next generation moving forward to be open to speaking about stuff, to be aware about their mental health, to be resilient, and to also feel safe enough to share their worries and anxieties. And that really comes from us paying attention, from us sort of putting the phone down and really just zoning in and not saying, well, actually, I'm just going to make dinner and also ask you how your day was. Actually, stop making dinner, switch off, pay attention and really listen. Pay attention to what's being said. Pay attention to the feelings, the actions and the words that are being mentioned. And then there comes a point where you think, well, hold on a sec, I've got really no idea. Am I talking to somebody who is vulnerable, or am I talking to somebody who's just really having a bad day and actually they're absolutely fine? So when we talk about somebody who's being suicidal, sometimes it's quite nice to go in with something a bit more gentle, something that you tread lightly, and you might just ask very small questions like, so what do you think you're going to be doing in the future? How do you see yourself going forward next week? Keeping it really small. And if your responses back are like, well, actually, I can't see a future, or I don't see the point. And then say, well, actually, let's talk a bit more about that. There may come a point when actually you do have to ask that very direct question. And that very direct question would be something along the lines of, I just want to check, do you feel suicidal? And it can be helpful to give that yes, no answer back. Because by going yes, that person has now got the permission to just share what's been happening for them. And it allows you to very clearly work out what you need to do next. And if the answer is no, then actually, again, you can go, okay, great. I'm really pleased that is not the state of play, but let's see what we can do to assist you. So don't shy away from asking that very direct question, but perhaps build it up as you go across in your conversation, and then get to that point where you can say, actually, you know what, I am worried about you. I really just want to check out where you sit on this. Now, if you find yourself with a person who actually says, you know what, I really am worried. I do feel actually really vulnerable, and I have been thinking about different methods, or thinking about suicidal thoughts, and they just keep on coming and I don't know how to stop them. What you want to do is think about how can you support this person? And there are a couple of things. It's always a good idea to consider where that person has been and what has helped. So self-help, if that person, and we identify it's a previous attempt, what has helped in the past. If there is no previous attempt, then what are the structures and systems you have in place to support yourself? Why are they not working, or what is working? But then what can we do? So is it a case of the support systems of friends and family? How can we be there? And it doesn't have to be huge things. I mean, for example, if somebody is struggling and hasn't really left their house, for weeks on end, It could just be simple as, let's just go for a short walk. Because walking is actually one of those really brilliant things, because you don't have to have eye contact and you can have a conversation. And it can even be something along the lines of, let's just watch TV together. It doesn't have to be a big thing, because actually being there next door to someone gives that connection. And then obviously there's professional support. So, if it's identified that actually this is something beyond or in addition to the friends and family and individual, self-help, working with the GP. If you're working with a young person, there is the Children and Adolescents Mental Health Service, CAMS, that's available. Now, as with many things, there is something around waiting times and access. And also when you do access, you actually get to see someone that you can connect with, but that service is available. And there are lots of other agencies and voluntary sector organizations and helplines that can assist as well. So when we talk about helplines, for us, there are a couple of useful organizations that we think do work, and mainly because it's about accessibility. So Samaritans has been the front runner around suicide prevention and supporting those with suicidal ideation for many, many years. And I did at one point know how long they've been up and running, but I would say more than 50 years. And this 116 number is a free phone number. You do get through to somebody who will provide you with a listening ear, somebody that you can talk to in confidence. What you will not necessarily get is information and pathways of how to access other support. So it's great if you yourself feel that you need to speak to someone in confidence, retain your anonymity. If you are what we say is an affected other, so if you're a parent, carer, partner of somebody who has suicidal ideation, again, great for you to get that support, but not necessarily what do I do next. The National Suicide Prevention Alliance also has a free phone number helpline as well. And interestingly, these services often operate slightly odd hours or longer hours. The National Suicide Prevention Alliance actually runs through to 3 a.m, because we know there will be individuals who will call after everything else is shut, middle of the night stuff. PAPRA's Helpline is another service, and actually PAPRA's remit is also really focused on young people, assisting those young people who are struggling and providing them with plans of safe plans of how to keep safe. And then the final service is Young Minds. Now, Young Minds is really for parents of children that are perhaps mental health, poor mental health or anxiety or even suicidal ideation. And one of the things they offer is one-off contact with a counsellor. So you can actually set up a meeting and speak and work through with somebody tactics, strategies of how to move forward. And then if you want to find out more, then obviously the Mental Health Foundation has abundance of information around not just suicide, but depression, anxiety, a whole host of stuff. And there are lots of organizations that, voluntary sector organizations that are available to provide that support. And sometimes voluntary organizations are more accessible than statutory services because there isn't necessarily a waiting time to access them. Now, my final point around this is if you do encounter someone and you are speaking to someone and it becomes absolutely clear that that individual has a clear and immediate plan to end their life or has already taken steps to do so, then actually we're not talking about support. We're not talking about we're really talking about intervention. We're talking about what do I need to do to get that person emergency help? And the things that really should be there in terms of if you're going to be calling the blue light sirens is name, address, age, telephone number. But if you can, what are the circumstances and intent? So for example, you actually walk in and somebody's sitting there with a bottle of vodka and a host of tablets, that's the information to pass on to. But if they've already taken the tablets, trying to work out how many and what tablets is really important information. One of the other things that you can also do is actually ask for a welfare check. So this is when the police will go and actually check in on someone. It's not blue flashing lights. It's actually something that can take a few days for it to happen, but you can request that, and a local officer will go and knock on someone's door and just check that they're okay. And with all of this, whenever we talk about suicide prevention, working with someone, it's really important that you also get that support as well. So, if you find yourself supporting someone, then actually find somewhere where you feel supported. And again, there are many helplines that can do that, but even, friends, family, support groups, so that actually you don't feel isolated as well. So I'm going to pause there and see if there are any questions or anything anybody thought and then thought, crikey, don't be shy.
If you want to pop the question into the chat, you can do that. And if you want to pop the question directly to either Priya or myself, we can read it out and keep it anonymous if you want to do that. And if you want to press the space bar and ask the question, that's another option as well.
While you think of questions, let me carry on talking. So, having just done what I would say is a whistle-stop tour of what are the nuts and bolts of thinking around suicide, we do have that one-day course actually happening next month. And all of our courses, anybody can come along to. There's an individual price point, and our websites have the registration form available on them. But linking in with this, we also have a course around resilience and reflection. And this is actually for practitioners, people who work with other service users. But actually, when I think about it, resilience is one of those things where certainly the toolkit that we have, the different toolkits that we consider, anyone can use. They can be applicable whether you are a pharmacist or whether you're a helpline worker or whether you're a teacher. These are all good tactics to have. And then our 2-day course, which is our comprehensive communication flagship course, is actually if you are volunteering or working on a service which is providing support to vulnerable callers. So today, obviously, was a webinar, and we do run other webinars every month called Boundaries and Self-Care. And again, you can sign up to them. They're free. They run usually at lunchtime. And the self-care one really, again, thinks about, your own practice, the way we are in day-to-day life, and perhaps little tweaks that we can make to make better care, take better care of ourselves. And we've recently launched our Bounce Back from Burnout workshop, which is going to be sort of 90 minutes long. And really, that's, again, our aim with all of our courses is really to provide with information, but also to provide you with actions and practical information that you can walk away and implement, so that, it is about practice. It's about implementing, not just a very passive engagement. And this is our contact details if you do want to get in touch with us at any point. Do we have any questions?
There's nothing come through on the chat.
No worries.
So
in that case, I would probably say to myself, wow, you've done a really amazing job. Nobody has any questions. No, we do. Sarah said, so to reply to this, it's interesting, isn't it? Like, if isolation is what we consider to be a factor in terms of risk of suicide, the idea that, the more and more isolated we feel, the less and less connected we feel, then perhaps we are more vulnerable. And then what do you do if you yourself as a person struggle, if you're extremely shy, or if you lack confidence, or it's not comfortable to be in a big, large setting? And I certainly feel that, and I'm really blowing my own trumpet here, this is a skill in itself, to sit here and do this, right? To talk to people, to not worry really about, what's going out there into the ether. And for somebody, this could be their worst nightmare, to be sitting here presenting. And I would probably say that if you find yourself in a place where you are feeling you need support, but actually don't feel you have that circle of close confidence, then to seek out the activities that bring you joy. So various ideas spring to mind, but I was watching this thing called Sewing Bee last night. I don't know if everybody's seen it. It's a very English thing. It's a TV program about sewing and making garments. But what it did say to me was that actually the joy that somebody else gets from knitting, crocheting, individual activities, peaceful activities, if you can find something like that that brings you in a joy, that in itself will build your resilience as well. Being comfortable in your own environment, being comfortable in your own skin is also part of that. And many people get a lot of peace from even sort of physical activity, whether that's running, swimming, yoga, Pilates, single individual activity, which isn't a team sport, but actually it provides you with ways to mentally and physically stretch yourself. And that's part of it, right? To be able to exercise those brain muscles and feel that you are doing something for yourself. And although you might be thinking I'm bashing online access and so forth, there is something to be said for the fact that now actually there's probably a group for something online, whatever your interest is. If you're into, I don't know, monsters and aliens, then actually there's probably some online group where actually you don't necessarily have to present all of you. You can just present a picture or a little bit of you and feel connected and share. And actually, it's absolutely fine to be there and not engage and just be present. But finding those little things that make you feel that you're taking steps to engage on a level that's comfortable for you, that's the important thing. And what works for one person might not be the right thing for somebody else.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Priya. And some of the things which were shared during the week were along the lines of what you said, but some specific examples were like book clubs, walking groups, like you said, sports ones, so going to the gym and chatting with people there. Faith groups can help if you have faith. And so yeah, ones which are touching upon the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual aspects, and even gardening clubs and bowling clubs and those kind of things. So a lot of those are physical ones, but like I said, there are virtual ones available. But it's taking that step to step into a group or into an area where, as you said, it's something you enjoy doing or has given you joy, and being with like-minded people and that sense of connection.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things, and I think we're all guilty of this, is often like I don't have the best coordination, so going to a Zumba class is definitely not for me, right? Because I'll just feel really out of my comfort zone. But if you do find something, give it more than one go. It's always, they say like exercise, you're meant to do it for 3 weeks and it becomes a habit. But actually, if you're going to go off and do a painting class, do it for the 6 weeks, because actually people need to see you there on a regular basis to then say, look, here we go. Same people is there. I'm sitting next door to the same person. You're not going to make that instant connection in the first meeting. Absolutely wonderful if you do, but you have to give some things a little bit more than that first try. And that also comes back to being a little bit brave.
Yeah.
Well, I'm more than happy. You got my email address. If you want to send me a note at any other point, then please do drop me a line. And likewise, I think if most people are registered, and if you want to get in touch with Childline and forward on any messages, then please do that as well. But from me, just to say thank you for being present and listening for the last 45 minutes. And I hope you all keep well, and I wish you all the very best.
Yeah, no, thank you, Priya. It was a very insightful and in-depth session. There was the aspects about the different risk groups and the different factors. I was aware of some of them, but not all of them. And the means one was one which really struck. I hadn't thought of, the vets and the farmers. When you mentioned that, it was like, really? And as you explained it, it made sense on that. So no, thank you for that. so Authentic Responses is Priya's organization. The website is also, a link to the website is on the Mental Health Awareness Week blog on the Happy Life Habits site, and she shared her email address earlier. So different ways that you can get in touch. And the free webinar that they host, I've attended the self-care one and thoroughly enjoyed it. So do recommend, taking out at lunchtime and attending one of those sessions. So please do take that opportunity. Yeah, so Priya shared the email in the chat, so you can grab that. So that's great. I'm just going to share a few more slides as we wrap up today's session and wrap up the week of sessions we've had. So again, Priya, really, a huge thank you to you and everyone who's taken part and supported these sessions, as well as all the people who've attended. Really appreciate that. And a couple of things. So I think, yeah, can you see the screen okay, everyone? Yep. So this one we shared the other day, and it's just highlighting that the things we can do to increase our happiness are things like mindfulness, kindness, and gratitude. And yesterday we shared those practices help reduce our stress. But an additional one, which two things I wanted to actually just show on this is one, with mindfulness. Here, pain was one of the things that chronic pain is one of the things that was discussed. So the practice of mindfulness can help reduce the pain. So these are some of the things we can do to help reduce some of the symptoms that we can feel. Acts of kindness and volunteering is another way we can be connected with people. They can help lower our depression and loneliness. And again, as I said, reduce stress and increase our mood. Gratitude is another one for stress and reducing the stress levels, but also writing a letter of gratitude was shown to reduce the feeling of hopelessness in 88% of suicidal inpatients, and it increased their levels of optimism by 94%. So it's one practice which, in many cases has helped people, save their lives in a way. So the practice of gratitude and a gratitude letter for increasing that sense of hope and a future and optimism being there. So these are all things we can do and habits we can develop. So in sharing this, all week, there's 8 billion people on this planet almost, and why then does loneliness exist? We're part of that problem. We're also part of that solution. And part of that solution is all of us just stepping up and stepping out a little bit of our comfort zone and stepping up and doing a little bit more of being more friendly, being more kinder, being more aware, and being more connected. And all of those, linked in with mindfulness, kindness, and gratitude. And it's just a small act of a genuine smile, a hello, or a how are you, to help people feel connected and belonging. And it could just make all the difference to someone. Actually, with that, there's a story which I'll quickly share, which I vaguely remember. So there was a student who was at school, and he was walking home, and he had bags full of books, and he dropped those books, and another boy came and helped pick up those books and carry them with him to his home, and they became good friends through that. And at their graduation, the boy who had dropped the books had, I think, had the opportunity to share a speech, and he shared a speech, and his mum was there, and his friend was there who had helped him, and he said, to his friend that. That day when you helped carry my books, you turned my life around. I was emptying my lockers, to take the books away because I had no hope that I was going to take my own life. But your act of kindness of helping me with the books and helping, talking to me and being a friend, turned my life around. So just simple acts that we can do can make a massive difference. the Robin Williams quote is, one that really strikes home. So I'll share it again, and the perennial bereavement. The connection is why we're all here. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. And Robin Williams, I used to think that the worst thing in the world was to end up alone. It's not. The worst thing is being with people who make you feel alone. And so we all have the opportunity, the responsibility, and the means to help others not feel alone. And it's, as we said, just friendlier, kinder, more connected, more aware. And Robin Williams played in the film Patch Adams. It's about a real doctor whose name is Patch Adams. And what Patch Adams has shared is, when we treat an illness, we either win or lose. But if we treat the person, we listen to them, and we love them, we can't fail. So it's not about treating the illness, it's about treating the person with heart, with listening, with kindness. That's what has been shared. Yeah, so the link here, linktree with the dot between in the middle of the tree word / happy life habits. If you go to that, there's a mental health awareness link that will take you to a mental health awareness blog where all the articles that we've talked about are shared there. All the recordings for everything that's been shared this week is uploaded there, as well as other materials. So that you can find there if you want some more information. So that, does bring us to the end of today's session, as well as our sessions for Mental Health Awareness Week. So I am going to stop the recording and just finally say, again, a thank you to everyone who's taken part and supported this endeavor. And thank you to all of you who've attended. If you do have any feedback, please do share and let us know. And we do hope these sessions were useful for you. And I'll stop the recording. And if anyone does want to share anything in our last few minutes, we'd love to hear that.